So our next speaker is going to be Ashwin Krishnan. He's CEO of Uber Knowledge, and he's going to talk about several aspects related to big data, including privacy, ethics, and regulations. Ashwin.
So I'm between you and lunch, so I need to show up. Otherwise, I'm sure you're going to drift away, right? So no pressure on me. So before I get started, right, there are three things I want to get out of this from an outcome-based perspective. I'm here to entertain, empower, and educate, right? So if I don't entertain, then phone me. If I don't educate, phone me. But the ultimate thing is empowerment, right? Because you can shock and awe people about privacy and ethics, but unless you're able to act on it, it's all meaningless. So with that in mind, let's get started. Anybody ever thought about this? Anybody owning an Alexa or a Google Home? Neighbor stops by, neighbor's conversation may get recorded. Yes, no, maybe. Think about it as we move along. So there are really four aspects that one needs to be concerned about, awareness-wise. And we'll go into all four of them: big data, regulations, ethics, and privacy, right? So think of this as the four horsemen, the four pillars that needs to be front and center wherever you go, right? With this backdrop, let's start with, why is this such a big conference? There's a three-part answer to this, right? Which is, the first part is storage. Does anybody think about storage costs anymore? I mean, as consumers, you don't think about it, right? I mean, you have your phone and it's connected to the cloud and you go on. So plummeting costs, storage costs. Ubiquitous access. And again, 5G is all around us, LTE is here. So the fact that you have continuous access to storage, regardless of whether it's on-prem, it's in your edge cloud, or it's in the true public cloud, doesn't matter. Third one, FOMO. Anybody afraid of FOMO? Fear of missing out. Now, I cannot tell you how many times I've talked to people about, why are you collecting this data? What if I need it tomorrow? So the fear of missing out is a big driver to let me collect like there's no tomorrow. Compute on demand. So just having storage isn't going to cut it. This is the other pillar, which is you now have costs. I mean, AWS reInvent is happening right now in Vegas. At last count, I think 65,000 attendees. And they defined what compute on demand is. So you now have storage, ubiquitous, fast, cheap, and you have compute. Same thing, ubiquitous access. You can compute in the cloud, you can compute on the edge, you can compute on the IoT device itself. Wherever you want, you can compute. And the last piece is really, the delivery of compute is no longer confined to a data center. It's no longer confined to a cloud only. It could be in between, anywhere you choose, right? So storage and compute. This is super, super important. So if you go Google IBM pre-existing AI models, I think at last count they had about 9 models that they have made available open source. So the barrier to entry in terms of, what do I do with all this data? I'm a startup with no funding. Where do I go start building this model? This exists right now. The second one is pre-existing models. I mean, the point of saying, okay, do I need to build my own model? Those days have passed. You already have a starting point, which is more and more accessible to more people. And the last part is the ability to retrain those models. Again, lots of open source out there that allows you to learn from biased data, biased algorithms, conclusions that were inaccurate or off the charts, and be able to better that. So again, storage, compute, and software, right? So this is the first pillar. Let's talk about privacy. Anybody here care about privacy? That's somebody else's problem? Okay, few hands went up. I live and breathe this stuff. Center for Humane Technology, I urge you to go and take a look at it. The founder is a person by name Tristan Harris, who used to be Google's privacy guru, ethics guru a while back. It's an amazing institution, just for awareness, right? Omidyar Network, founder of eBay. Again, brand name folks getting out there and raising awareness of what privacy really means in a manner that is consumable. And these are not people pontificating, sitting on a pedestal because they've made millions of dollars and saying, okay, now we get it. This is fundamental. I'll get to that in a minute. And there are grassroots efforts. If you Google people like Pari Aftab, David Ryan Polgar. So David Polgar goes by the tag of tech ethicist. That's his name. And he's a journalist, right? And he has nothing to do with technology per se, but where they've grown up gives them an ability to talk about technology and privacy in a way that's unforeseen so far. So that's the activism piece, right? Software perspective, privacy. Anybody here uses Signal? So we have a few hands going up. What is Signal? Encrypted end-to-end messaging on top of whatever you already use, right? Now, some people might say, hey, this is over the top. But we heard from the previous speaker, if you buy something and somebody unknown gets to know of it and you get targeted tomorrow, you feel violated. Why? There's transactions going on. So Signal is a way of giving end user more control over the communication piece. TunnelBear. Now I use TunnelBear every time I come to a place like this. Oh, we have free Wi-Fi. No, you don't have free Wi-Fi. You're getting access to connectivity and you're giving up your data. Right? So never ever get caught up by saying, hey, you have free Wi-Fi, free connections. No, you don't have free connections. Now you could say, hey, there's WPA and WEP and all these things, but those are relatively insecure and you are relying on the encryption that's being provided by the access points over here. So TunnelBear is one of many endpoint VPN clients. Right? Again, from a privacy perspective, as a consumer, you can use this, and it's relatively inexpensive. Anybody here has tried Facebook News Eradicator? Anybody heard of it? Okay, try it. What it does is replaces your news feed with inspiring quotes. And what you will learn from it is how different the world would look like if you did not have a recommended algorithm showing you what Facebook wants you to see. So it takes away noise from the system. Now, you might feel shocked at the complete lack of quote-unquote news, but it's just another way of saying, hey, what would happen if the algorithms stop, and instead, you really get inspiring quotes on a daily basis. So let's talk about exposés. And again, this is not a shock and awe thing. I'm going to give you with more empowerment, but Facebook Cambridge Analytica continues to haunt us. Why? Because we never thought about what Facebook does with the data. We never thought about the fact that Cambridge Analytica has different privacy practices than Facebook does. So you should never forget about what happened over there. Alexa, again, reInvent is going on right now. I think Amazon is one of the best run companies on the planet. However, they have a job to do, which is to find out what's the next thing you're going to buy. Wall Street Journal had Amazon talking about healthcare, being able to predict what you're going to be doing next. And in this particular case, again, this conversation between a husband and a wife being sent to one of their random contacts, and Amazon explaining that it just picked up the contact list and thought that it was meant to be sent to that person. So, but what did the couple do? Pull out the plug on Alexa. I have so many friends of mine, tech friends, who say, you know what? Oh, I've been using Alexa for 2 years, but I've unplugged it. Do you still Amazon shop? Yeah. You've unplugged one of 20 different connection mechanisms. But yet they get a feeling of satisfaction of unplugging Alexa. So let's be real over here. That's just one of 20 different ways these companies are trying to triangulate us. So unplugging Alexa, yeah, maybe you get a feeling of physical satisfaction, but it means nothing unless you know what's the thought behind it. And my personal one, this is my favorite. So I use AT&T Uverse. I'm a reasonably happy customer. I was up in Vancouver back in July when the World Cup match, I believe, between Croatia and England was going on. And I wanted to see the match, but I was away from home. Home is here for me. And the only way I could see it for free was to download the AT&T Uverse app on my phone, which I did. And that's what the Uverse application asked for: identity, location, photos, Wi-Fi, device ID, for watching a 90-minute soccer match. I need to give up all this. But I wanted to watch the match. There was no way I was not going to watch the match. So guess what I did? I gave it the permissions. I said yes to everything, and I turned off everything as soon as the app was installed. Everything worked just fine. It didn't have any need for these permissions, none whatsoever. And I watched the match. Now, there are lots of software people over here. Anybody knows default options allow? So as a software programmer, you probably have these platforms that talked about existing models, talked about retraining models, and they have a default option, which is ask for everything under the sun. Most people will say yes. I'm going to track you forever. No problem at all. Much after the World Cup has ended. It's been, what, 4 months right now? I deleted the app, but I'm on the far extreme corner of privacy and ethics, so forget about me. But even if you just kept the app on and you turn those permissions off, you'd be giving up less information. Awareness. So, anybody heard about the Microsoft chatbot that started tweeting racial tweets? Few nods. Go Google it, right? Google it. Okay. Google also ran into issues. This was, I think, a year or two ago, where they identified two African-American men as gorillas. Again, both these companies apologized. Why? Biases. Data biases, algorithmic biases. But ethics was not top of mind for them, number one. Number two is, this is a wonderful book called Radical Markets. What it does is talks about AI, everything that's happening around here. Imagine if each of us had an AI agent, a personal Jeeves for Wodehouse fans out there, who is looking after us. And you'll hear this concept more and more. Tim Berners-Lee, World Wide Web, he started, has an open source project called Solid, which is now turned into a commercial entity called Interrupt. He talks about the same thing. So you will hear more of this, where an AI agent who is, in my case, looking after Ashwin wherever I go. And this is Edith Ramirez, FTC chairwoman, back in CES, Consumer Electronics Show, back in 2015. And she talked about this like 4 years ago or 3 years ago, where ubiquitous collection of data, what happens with the data, and how does it get secured? Right, so this awareness is happening as we speak. Let's talk about businesses. Anybody heard of the data transfer project? No? Okay. So data transfer project, I believe, is between Twitter, Facebook, and a few others, which allows data portability. Imagine, for all those tweeters out there or Facebookers out there, if you could get all the tweets you've ever done, the reshares, the replies, in a portable format, and take it with you wherever you go, to a different platform. So DDP is a group of these large companies that have come together to put this. Boundless Mind is a really interesting Southern California startup, which is taking a very interesting tack. What they're saying is, the addictive nature of these social apps, let's not fight it. It's here. You have these big algorithms and data that is training at our minds, so there's no point fighting it. But what they've done is they're building a platform using that same technology and applying it to human well-being, education, health. So they're taking the same thing. Let's not fight this battle. Let's start creating a platform that they will pick and choose which customers to give that to for social causes. And then Apple Digital Health, again, you have to give the tip of the hat to Apple as a company and Tim Cook as its leader to start talking about this, to start talking about, okay, what does digital health really mean? And I think it was yesterday that IBM's CEO, Virginia Rometty, talked about this as well. So large companies are starting at the CEO level. This is not a chief privacy officer, a chief ethics officer who's sitting on by the side just to keep the regulators at bay. This is the #1 executive in these companies starting to talk about this, which is a cultural shift. Technology, user-managed access. Again, you can Google this. This has been, again, I talked about the AI agent. This is the same thing, which is what is UMA as a protocol where you and I have control over what we give access to. IEEE. Can you imagine IEEE talking about this personal data AI agent? So we have standards bodies that are starting to make this much more mainstream. And the last one, again, for people out here who know more about AI than I ever will, AI explainability. How does Microsoft stand up there and say, why did my chatbot start spewing out racial tweets? Why? So humans have to go and explain why an AI model did what it did. So this is a brand new world we're entering into. Maybe that we have an AI agent that's going to look after another AI which is going crazy. I'll give you this example. I mean, it just cracked me up. So yesterday or day before, so I follow LinkedIn on LinkedIn, right? So my news feed says, and the top post 2 days ago was, LinkedIn was in the news. And what was the news? The 18 million Facebook email addresses that LinkedIn had access to. So it was the most unnewsworthy thing that was being elevated to the top. I was saying, hey, you need to take a look at this because our company was in the news for the wrong reasons. So again, I'm looking at this and saying, so clearly AI models have a lot of retraining to do. But somebody has to explain that, right? If Jeff Weiner came down and said, okay, why is people following LinkedIn seeing this at the top of their feed? Some human has to stand up there and start to explain why that happened in the first place. GDPR. I won't talk about this because it's all over right now with General Data Protection Regulation. But the thing about GDPR that I find really interesting is it is actually relatively easy reading. It's not for the faint of heart, but if you compare every other regulatory piece of written material out there, these 62, 63 pages is relatively easy reading. And the reason for that is they started off with how do we plain speak consumer rights. They started with the consumer in mind. Yes, they have technologies like data handlers at the back, data controller, data processor, but for the most part, if all you care about is, can I go and ask my service provider to get access to my data? I'll give you another example. Anybody has ever tried data portability with, okay, let me back up. How many LinkedIn users here? All hands going up, great. How many of you have ever tried to exercise your GDPR rights with LinkedIn? You did? Okay, 2 of us. What does it mean? You can go and ask them to send you a CSV, a comma-separated value file of everything you've ever posted on LinkedIn. I got it the day after GDPR went into effect, May 28th of this year. I got my first dump in half hour, I got the second dump in 24 hours. Hats off to LinkedIn. But what it did to me was shocking. I mean, I'm relatively active on LinkedIn, but for me, seeing everything I've ever posted, my digital exhaust, if you will, was mind-numbing. Why? Because I'm leaving such a big trail behind. And why am I getting shocked about getting targeted? LinkedIn has this. And what can they do with that? I have no friggin' idea. None. So the point being, GDPR allows us to exercise rights, which raises awareness. I talked about empowerment. This is empowerment. Please go and exercise your rights with LinkedIn. What does it do? It signals LinkedIn that people are watching. And GDPR is not to keep the EU off your back. It's to make sure the consumers have a way to exercise their rights. So we got to stop playing victim here. Those days are gone. I mean, why are these halls packed? Because there's data, there's algorithms, we're all trying to run businesses more efficiently, being able to target our audience. That exists. At the same time, we're consumers as well. So we have two roles to play, most of us. So other regulations. People in California, you have CSEPA, California Privacy Act, going into effect very soon. Very similar to GDPR with a little more teeth, opt-out deletion. Anybody know about the 327 Senate bill that got passed 2 months ago? We're in an IoT conference. Please wake up. Go look it up. I'll give you one tenet from that. Default passwords, not allowed anymore. So if you're a manufacturer of a router, I don't see any router here, let's pretend there's a router here, you have to have a different password for every device that you manufacture. And the password has to be changed the first time it's booted. Why? One of the biggest security holes is default passwords in IoT devices. So California is clearly forward-leaning, but if you're doing business in California, you'd better know what it means. Again, when I talk about awareness, so this is not just grassroots efforts, not just businesses. We have regulations that are coming into place very, very quickly. And the last one is Asilomar AI principles. California Assembly, again, gave their support to these principles. Go take a look at these principles. Very, very interesting about data collection, data privacy, who gets access to what. Folks like Elon Musk, Stephen Hawkins, they're all signatories to this AI principles. So, and awareness, regulations-wise. So I talked about GDPR. California Privacy Act is very similar. We're getting to a point where regulations are no longer lawyer speak. We still have ways to go, but it's getting to a point where it can be understood by the average person. Consumer awareness, we talked about that. But again, LinkedIn or any other form of entity, whether it's Facebook, Google, all of them have GDPR compliance today. So you can actually go and get the same thing I talked about on LinkedIn with any one of these web properties. Prepare to be shocked if you're active on social media. And anybody remember when May 28th, when GDPR went into effect? In fact, even today, if you go to a website, you have this annoying, oh, we're collecting cookies, and unless you hit X, the web page isn't properly displayed, right? So it's irritating. How many of you actually even read the text? You just want to get to the web page, and you have this annoying thing that shows up, and you hit X, and you've suddenly said, I have accepted, without knowing what we accepted. So is it even feasible for us as distracted consumers to even start reading that? But awareness is one step behind that, which means even if you say X to that, like what I did with the AT&T Uverse app, it's just a little bit extra effort of saying, I don't think this app needs access to my Wi-Fi connection and photos and contacts list. I just think it's wrong. It takes another 30 seconds. Otherwise, we give everything up. So from a business standpoint, what does a business have to do? And this is, again, back to the empowerment. I've been talking about consumers so far. From a business standpoint, data weaponization, sharing, transparency, and control. So let's start with weaponization. And these are questions you as business leaders, business owners, product developers need to start asking yourself. How much data do I collect? And this can't be FOMO. It can't be fear of missing out. Second question is, based on the data collected, what sorts of prediction do I have and can I derive? So Twitter, for example, I think 3 years ago, based on a person's tweet, could actually predict he or she is actually getting into a depressive state of mind 60 days ahead of that person actually knowing. Now, imagine if you're Twitter and you know that Ashwin is going to get into depression in 60 days, what's your moral responsibility, if any? I'm an adult, so telling my parents is probably not the right thing to do. Telling my spouse, I don't know. Or just shut up. Maybe sell it to an antidepressant manufacturer. Lots of things can happen, right? But awareness of, okay, collecting data, you have these models, it's going to tell you something. What does it mean? How am I taking advantage of this asymmetrical relationship? And it is asymmetrical. Let's not kid ourselves. We're all going after consumers, and you'll have, as businesses, you have more data, and you have more predictions than the consumer ever knows. Can I shred the weaponized data on demand? If I exercise my GDPR right and say I want the right to be forgotten, can you hit the shred button and shred all evidence of my data? Data sharing. This is, before Cambridge Analytica happened, lots of people had no idea what data sharing meant. Now most people do. I have businesses who are not even in the tech space who say, hey, you know what, we have 7 or 8% of the world's internet traffic flows through us. We have all the data. We can give you the data. So data brokering is becoming a big thing. You may never be in the model business yourself, but lots of people have access to the data. I'll give you another example, right? Roomba. Roomba users here? Few. iRobot, manufacturer of Roomba? Yes. 2 years ago, Roomba was caught with their pants down because they were mapping your home, taking it to the cloud without the end user consent. Last year, the CEO went on record saying, hey, we have mapped the entire home. We're probably going to start selling this data to somebody. Feel violated? Now, I actually happened to meet one of iRobot's top architects at Black Hat 2 years ago, and we happened to be in the same, on the same lunch table. This was 2 weeks after the expose happened. And I asked him, saying, why did you do this? And he said, for business reasons, because John Deere is wanting to come inside the home. So unless we know what your home looks like so we can start going outside, we'll be out of business. So from a business standpoint, they're now expanding their TAM. So it's no longer just inside the home. I want to go outside the home. So if I know you have a 2,000 square foot home, I roughly know you're a 6,000 square feet home in XYZ zip code. That's data. So purely from a business standpoint, maybe they were doing the right thing. But if you haven't worn your ethics hat, are you doing the right thing? And third and fourth, which is do you have a policy that can be revoked on demand? And GDPR is a good example of that. Do you have a data sharing policy that is codified? Facebook clearly didn't. And just Google this company called 643 that went out of business a year ago. I won't tell you anything more. 643. You'll figure out what data sharing and Facebook really looks like. User control. And this is huge because I argue that companies who make this front and center will actually have customers for life because you are going to step over and beyond anybody else. Can they stop sharing the data? Can I choose how much data I can share? Am I getting penalized for not sharing data? So I don't know whether Uverse has turned down my bandwidth at home because I'm not giving them any access using my app. I have no idea. So don't penalize. And the last piece, which is back to the book I talked about earlier, Radical Markets, is are you providing incentives for the end user? In certain parts of the world, privacy is a non-issue. People don't care about privacy. Yeah, it's fine. I mean, you can take all my data. But I'm really interested if you pay me for the data. So there's business to be had. So let's not all put on the moral jacket and say, you know what, hey, privacy is really important. It may be important to some. For others, it could just be a commerce transaction. In fact, this person did an exercise, I think about a year and a half ago, where he actually auctioned his entire Facebook data. And guess what the price was? The going price for his complete Facebook data. $280 was the asking price. So $280, he auctioned off his social persona. Transparency. Are my TNCs decipherable? Again, I call out Apple over here because they have done an amazing job. Remember the iTunes EULA, which used to be 60 pages long? It's down to about 11 pages. Go look at their TNCs right now. It's probably one of the first companies out there that have actually made it understandable. And they've actually taken a step further saying, this is why we're collecting your data. So you're not treating the consumer as a source of information so I can weaponize and go after you. They're actually giving rationale as to why they're doing it, which is the second piece over here. Reason to opt out, option to opt out. I don't want to collect my data, click here. Right? And the last piece is the same thing I talked about earlier, which is, can we have a business model over here? All right, so I'm going to stop over here. These are all businesses that ultimately you need to be aware of, right? And again, California law was passed, which is if you're using a chat bot, the end user needs to know that it's a bot that you're talking to. An online dating site that uses bots because it's easy to use as an end consumer, you don't know whether you're talking to a real human being or not. It's business-wise, you can explain that. Ethics-wise, I don't know. And then I talked about this thing about how many of you have used LinkedIn to search for your next job? I'll stop right here. A few hands went up. Now, let's assume I'm the LinkedIn product manager, and I come up with this idea saying, hey, I know, for example, XYZ company has a lot of people looking for jobs. Can I go to their competitor, offer disgruntled employees as a service? Hey, it's a good business model. Because I've been in this hiring situation, I'm sure you have, where you've had to hire and the budget is closing. And if I get a list of people who are already in the market, my chances of closing is a lot higher. Is it the right thing to do? I'll leave it up to you. All right. Questions?
Thank you very much. Let's thank our speaker. Any questions?
One hand went up.
The part where I can download my
Sorry.
where I can download my data from Facebook or Twitter, what control does that give me? What can I do with it that will help me have a better life than I couldn't do before?
Great question. So the first thing it does, and what it did for me, is it raises awareness of how much of a digital trail you're leaving behind. First awareness, please. The second piece, which is still, I think the data transfer project is still a path towards that, is today you don't have an equivalent platform, unfortunately. But if you Google, I forget the exact name, but if you Google this person called Jaya Balu, last name B-A-L-O-O, she is the CISO of KPN, which is a Dutch telecom operator. So they've come out with this open source like Facebook platform. So ultimately, getting your data in a CSV form allows you to take that and take it to a different platform. Are we there today? No. But the first thing it does is raises awareness of how much you're leaving behind, which means that data could be used against you. But the second piece is once we have an equivalent, you could actually take the CSV and dump it into a different platform. So those are the two things that I'd say.
Other questions?
Lunch is beckoning.
Well, I have a question.
Sure.
To what extent? So, looking at the economy as it stands today, I don't know. I don't have a dollar figure for this, but there's a huge amount of the economy that's purely based on making money out of data.
Yep.
And the question is, so I have so many questions. We can talk about that at lunch. But the question is like, what is going to happen? Like, let's say that all these companies say that we are going to, or let's say regulations come in that says that people need to adopt all these privacy, related, whatever initiatives. What's going to happen to these businesses? What's going to happen to the economy? What are your thoughts on that?
So it's a great question. So again, like I said, my job is not to pontificate saying this is right and this is wrong, right? And the example I gave you is in cybersecurity, we have this thing called tabletop initiatives. And the tabletop initiative is, imagine a boardroom where you sit down over here and say, let's assume that half of our customer data is now available online. What does the board do? How do we respond to that? And the reason to do that is don't wait for a data breach. Let's collectively put ourselves together and see, do we send a press release out? Do we get somebody like FireEye in, do a forensics first? So the question that you're asking is, everybody is in the data business. If not, this would not be a conference of this size. You have to ask yourself the same tabletop exercise, which is, if half of my customer base found out that I'm actually using the data and selling it to a third party, what would the reaction be? Right, so some of these are mental exercises that as a business, you have to ask yourself. Because just hiding behind checking the GDPR box or the CACPA box is taking us farther away from the consumer. So a lot of and these are difficult things. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, these are hard things. I mean, imagine a board, Equifax, for example, right? If the board had sat together and said, hey, what if we had a data breach where whatever 50 million customers' records were exposed, what would the reaction be? No one wants to talk about that. Oh, let's worry about that tomorrow, right? So, but as businesses, exactly like you're saying, because we're in the business of collecting data, either through ourselves or through data brokers or selling the data, you have to understand if XYZ happens, what would we do?
I mean, so I completely agree with you on that. And one of the things that I worry about, and I have no answer, I'm not expecting an answer, it's just a comment, is that businesses are not trying to build database businesses for our generation.
Correct.
They are trying to build it for the coming generations. And so the idea is that build a culture, which you can see, in the younger generation, they are much more open about sharing data, whether they know the risks or not. But they are just building that into that culture that you do this, that's how you're going to be cool. And that kind of worries me because people, I mean, in our generation, we are worried about that, and we can discuss who is more on the right between you and me with regards to data privacy.
Right.
But I think that whole, there's a cultural shift that's happening, and I just worry that my kids and my kids' kids won't even care about it because it's become a norm.
So there are a few comments over here. So I'm sure, I'll just add to that. So one of my close friends actually uses Alexa to read bedtime stories to his kids. I'll just leave it there, right? So there are various uses of technology. This is being one of them. Outsourced parenting, I call it.
Well, sorry, go ahead. Okay, I'll bring it to you.
Yeah. My question is regarding the privacy and targeted customer issue. I recently found out if you Google something or you watch a TV channel doing something, and you will immediately see like a customized advertisement on your TV channel.
Yep.
Even the TV channel is unrelated.
Yep.
You can get very specifically your ethnic, your political view and targeted. Now, like this kind of cross-platform, targeted advertising, where we can start to minimize it. I know we cannot eliminate it. Is there any regulation going on, discussing in the high level, how we are going to handle this one? For example, your IP, what's that, IPO? What's that? internet service company, and my cable company, and my Google account, and my Microsoft, Windows, whatever platform, they are all connected.
Correct.
Yeah.
So it's a great question, which is what kind of data collusion is happening in the backends between these hub economies? How do we do anything about it, right? So first off, I'd highly encourage you to read a Gizmodo story article called The House That Spied on Me. If you haven't read that, please read it. It's brilliant journalism. It's technology, it's ethics, but it also talks about what a connected home looks like. So the short answer as a consumer is just be aware of what you're turning on. Like I said, I have lots of high-tech friends who have unplugged their Alexa, but you're still shopping like crazy with cookies turned on and don't use a privacy browser, right? So the second piece is awareness that data brokering is happening, and it'll happen at a much bigger level. Now, from a regulation perspective, I think we're getting there. I mean, I was really happy to see California actually passing the IoT Act, right? I mean, it's a huge step forward, endorsing the Asilomar AI principle. So I think if you look at it from an activism perspective, it's going to come from EU, it's going to come from California, and then we got to see where it goes. But like I said, there are lots of parts of the world, my origin, India and Asia, where the human acceptance of privacy, or the way we talk about being violated in privacy, doesn't exist. So for them, it's more of a commerce transaction, right? Give me $10 a month, here, take it, right? For all I care. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. And then, like you mentioned, demographics matters. So millennials, Gen Zs, much more open, but at the same time, they have no brand loyalty. So that's a very interesting shift, which is, yeah, I'm going to give you stuff because that's who I am, but if you violate me, I'm gone, right? So as a business, just knowing which demographic you're talking about over here and how they're going to react, which is back to the tabletop exercise, right? It's a very unique way of saying, hey, what if the Gen Zs found out that I'm sharing data? What would they do? What would that look like, right? So there's no easy answer to this, but awareness, I think, is the first key.
Ashwin, thank you for your both presentation and your response to questions. I think it's clear that you've raised our level of awareness. I mean, it's been very valuable from that standpoint. My question is can you give us 2 or 3 practical things that we should do other than reading more and becoming privacy experts ourselves? I mean, lots and lots of read this, go to this link, and so forth. Some of them, one of them you gave us just to set the track going forward is if you sign up to AT&T Uverse, shut off the link. But are there other more practical ones with LinkedIn or Apple as things that we're all currently consuming?
Great question. Okay, so give us takeaways that we can act upon. Don't just shock and awe us, right? So searching. I use DuckDuckGo for all my searches. DuckDuckGo, all one word. I don't Google search if I can avoid it. Under pressure, I'll Google search, but if I Google search, I'll make sure I've signed out of my Gmail, of my Google Drive. So short answer is use privacy-based end applications as much as possible. And go look at DuckDuckGo's privacy practices. It'll give you a good understanding of what plain speak looks like, number one. Number two is, from an app perspective, how many apps do you have turned on, installed, and have you looked at their settings? What have you given them permission for? Now, unless you're downloading an app a day, this is I'd say maybe a half-hour, 45-minute exercise going through all the apps, looking at their settings, turning off stuff that makes no sense. And if some of the apps misbehave, figure out what you want to do, right? At that point, you are actively taking charge, which is I don't give Uber access to my location ever. I'm a big Uber user. It takes me another 30 seconds to put in my pickup address versus turning on GPS or Wi-Fi location, right? So from an app perspective, look at what the apps you have, what controls you've allowed them, take back all the controls, see if the app misbehaves. If it didn't, like it didn't for me in the AT&T Uverse case, you're fine. You've stopped giving that piece of data.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I think we are running late and everybody's going to miss lunch. So anybody who has questions, please connect with the speaker later. And we are going to be here back at, I think, 2:50, sorry. So thank you very much.